I mean, me being a B2B exposure guy where someone who's built a fintech and B2C, very different.
Is
And
that
so like,
what?
I'm like,
Are you
wait,
telling me
the revenue,
marketing budget?
the revenue is not recurring and there's churn. What is,
You call it ARR?
that looks very much like a once-off payment. So ultimately what we do is we aggregate over 100,000 summaries, videos, courses into one subscription. And so raised about $450 million to date and have become a unicorn and all the good things that come with the trappings of that. Every 1.2 seconds, someone completes a course or learning resource on our platform around the world.
When investing in a smaller market, usually they want to expand to the larger one. So is it easier to invest in a Nigerian company doing something in Nigeria or invest in a Ghanaian company that want to expand to Nigeria? Because when you think about it, it's better to bet on the local one who has a stronger grip on the market. Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode 9 of the Rallycap podcast. My name is Kyane, and I'm a general partner at Rallycap. Today's guest is Melvyn Lubega, who's a partner at Breega. Breega is one of Europe's fastest growing European VC firms, with around 700 million euros in assets under management. Breega was a very early investor in companies such as Exotech, a $2 billion French robotics startup, and Alice & Bob, a fascinating quantum computing European play that I highly recommend you to check out. In 2023, Breega partners with Melvyn and Tosin to launch their very first Africa-dedicated VC fund, an important case of a Europe to Africa VC firm expansion that reminds us of the Partech move back in 2016. Prior to joining Breega, Melvyn was a founding executive of Go1, helping it grow from zero to the $3 billion edtech giant that it is today. Melvyn is a rare example of a successful startup operator turned VC on the continent. He refreshingly brings true operational know-how to the investing scene in Africa. And without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Melvyn, thanks for doing this. Look at the setup.
I mean, look at the view. Look at the view.
Cool,
no,
man.
great to have this conversation.
Yeah, excited for this one. You've been on the entrepreneurial side, founding team of Unicorn, and then angel investor, successful one, and now VC. What kind of learnings do you try to get from each phase of Melvyn's life and bring it into the next phase? And maybe more importantly, what are the skills or even reflexes or mindset that you acquired in a phase that you actually don't want to bring into the next phase and say, you know what, that's old Melvyn.
It's interesting, you mentioned the point around habits you carry across. So I began my professional career in management consulting. And in consulting, you never really disagree, you don't argue. You almost say, it's a bad idea, it stinks. You wouldn't say that. You'd be like, how about you think about it this? Or why don't you think about it like this? Or why are you thinking it like that? Whereas when we then started Go1, I was doing that with my co-founders, like, Melvyn, is the idea good or bad? If it's bad, tell us and it's okay. And so I almost had to unlearn the politeness of not being as direct when I thought something wasn't what it should be. And so I guess to your point, in each phase, you learn and unlearn things. But I definitely find that the grounding of having been an entrepreneur, built a business, or being an operator has been valuable as a VC, particularly because you have a level of empathy, I think, of what it takes. So when things don't go the way they plan, you appreciate it. But I find going from, let's say, being a operator to being an angel investor. Yes, as operators, you will see particular deals because other founders reach out to you for assistance and that kind of thing. And as an angel, you're writing smaller checks, but you don't really care about how much of the cap table you own or whether you control the business, so on the board. And what I found as an angel, because I was one of the few angels at the time that had experience building technology, I would have 1% of the business, but the founders would always come to me. I'm like, guys, I'm not employing the business. I'm not a founder. I'm not like an institutional investor, but they would always come to me for advice on certain elements. And so I realized was VC is almost the blend of being an operator and a builder, because for us in our fund, we really want to focus on being sparring partners to the entrepreneurs. And so we want to take a meaningful stake in the business because we invest a lot with our teams, with our scaling squad into these businesses. And so you actually then can have a meaningful stake where you almost are a operator alongside the founders in the business. And so it is different, I think, when you are an angel. Yes, if you're in America, you can own 0.01% of Uber and still return a fund.
Yeah.
I think in our ecosystem in Africa, I don't think we're there yet where you can have a small stake in a company and really do outsized performances in returning a fund, especially a big fund. And so you want to make sure you have at least meaningful ownership that you can follow on and maintain throughout. And that's the different learnings, thinking through operating angel and now being a VC.
And just to start with Go1, for people who don't know it and don't know how big it is, can just share a few numbers on where is Go1 now?
Yeah, so Go1 is essentially the first, actually second business I built, but the first business I built at scale. And essentially Go1, you can think of it like a Spotify for corporate learning. So ultimately what we do is we aggregate over 100,000 summaries, videos, courses into one subscription. And then we offer that to companies now in over 60 countries with teams in 22 countries. And so raised about $450 million dollars to date and have become a unicorn and all the good things that come with the trappings of that. But really our focus in that business has been to how do we help people unlock their positive potential through a love for learning? Every 1.2 seconds, someone completes a course or learning resource on our platform around the world.
Good.
And so just being able to help people unlock that potential has been really exciting.
So once Go1 becomes a giant, then what do you think? You say, okay, we did it. I want to keep growing it to decacurrent territories. Or you say, hey, let me start something new. Or, you know what? I've done the operational side now. Let me go invest. Or just want to take vacation and chill or build hospitals and schools. So yeah, what was happening in your head? You probably did all of them.
Or I want to be on a really awesome podcast.
Here we go.
You know,
that's your dream, man.
So obviously, for us in Go1, ambition is to train 1 billion learners. And at tens of millions, we're very far from 1 billion. But I think for me, it's a question of asking myself of how can I have the biggest impact, me as Melvyn, and go on such a scale now where we're able to bring in very senior people who've been there and done that. And my co-founder is still in the business as well, for me to have comfort. And also I wanted to do a lot more in Africa, and Go1 has grown a lot, even more so outside of Africa. And so really wanting to do more on the continent. And also I asked myself in consulting when I began my corporate career, my biggest challenge was I created really amazing slides and Excel. I was really good at that, I promise. But you felt like you could give advice, but you could never really get things going because you weren't an operator.
Yeah.
As a operator, you're in the weeds of your business. So you really look up and see what's happening around you. As I find as an active investor, you're able to get the best of offering the advice, but also get stuck in where it matters the most. And so I think when I thought of myself, my career goal is to create 100,000 jobs. And so even across all the businesses I've built in my life and exited, I've only created 2,200 jobs.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Got a long way to go.
You gotta do better, man.
Got a long way to go. And so I was thinking through, I'm very passionate about solving problems with technology. And so being able to back entrepreneurs building in Africa and support them on that journey for me is something which is really a gift. And ultimately thinking through what industries and sectors enable technology to really transform what they do and how they create value.
And now you're a partner at Breega. Can you give a few numbers about Breega?
So Breega is a fund across Europe and Africa. Across our business, we manage 600 million euros odd, and that goes from pre-seed through to, let's say, Series AB. So really, the DNA of Breega is one around entrepreneurship and operators. So all the partners in the business are former builders, operators, founders of businesses. And so to the earlier point, they have a level of empathy when it comes to working with entrepreneurs and also good sparring partners. But I think also there's a culture of one team. It's not necessarily like you focus on seed and you focus on venture, you focus on Europe, you focus on Africa. And so you almost get the cross-pollination of the benefit of that, which I really enjoy there. But otherwise, one of the top performing early stage funds in Europe, also hoping to achieve similar in Africa using a similar strategy localized for that ecosystem. Across the company, probably about 102 portfolio companies across Breega.
I'm curious because there's also Partech who's European and have the Africa fund. I think Breega is the second example that comes to mind. I'm always curious about the transition in mindset where you're the first proper Africa partner and you come into the firm and then suddenly there's this European way of doing things. They bring in some of the learnings of this is how it works in Europe and let us try to make it in Africa. And then it's you and with your wealth of experience, you say, this is how it's done in Africa. So how do you find that equilibrium and how do you deal with it within the firm?
If, for example, let's say Breega, if we partner together, had thought they could do Africa, they would have done Africa without bringing in local partners. I think there's appreciation of there's something about Africa that is unique and you need to have people and partners on the ground to actually understand that market. And so it was different, but I think there was an appreciation of the difference in that. One of the first deals that we took to the IC, it was a YC-backed company. Like historically, YC companies, valuations get a bit crazy, guys are very strong. And because I knew the space the entrepreneur was in, what excited me was almost where the business could go. And because I knew the space, I was almost too attached to, yes, the business obviously can get it done, as opposed to, is this the right entrepreneur to be backing in this space? And it was so good being able to spar with my partners about this and realizing why it wasn't a good investment for a VC investor at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I think it's that guardrail and that sparring that's so valuable in that space. And so definitely, even you think about something we're big on in Breega is what we call our scaling squad. And so from that perspective, our chief scaling officer, Seba, spent lots of time on the continent. But again, how do you think about scaling in Africa versus Europe? It's very different because you have different go-to-market strategies, different tools you can use. And so even our playbook and approach to how we support our companies brings the best of Europe, but in the same vein also is localized based on our experience in Africa.
Honestly, what I really respect in Breega's move was that they could have continued writing checks to African companies from Paris, but they did the right move, which is to have an African partner, African fund, African office. That was initially my career plan. I'm going to build all these skill sets so that whenever Sequoia opens a Sequoia Africa team, I want to be the first, Sequoia employee in Africa.
Yes.
A lot of global funds don't subscribe to this vision. And I mean, they pay the price now, and I think they will keep doing so until they learn that this is how it's done.
This is true. But it's something, also, I think we have to get a few more big runs and exits on the board, because the reality is, given the size of a Sequoia, however, there's no real strong incentive to have a proper partner on the ground. But I think to your points about how do you get to the nitty gritty and build up that nuance. And same thing with YC. We did YC 2015. I mean, YC, because of its reputation, doesn't need to spend much time in Africa because it attracts the best entrepreneurs anyway, because of the halo effect. And so as an investor, you'll get in early by virtue of your halo. But then the question is, who are going to be the investors that actually work with you to drive the value on the continent?
But to your point, yes, they can attract the best ones, so they don't have to do an effort.
Yeah.
However, to be able to pick, and we saw some of these best funds in the world picking the wrong ones. And when I speak to them, they're aware of the mistake.
So how then do you, from your side, think about partnering with these bigger funds?
That's the whole point of Rallycap, is that, hey, we're the people on the ground. We have eyes and ears everywhere. We have an army of venture partners across Latin America and Africa. You big guys invest in us. We're your scout funds. We're going to do all the small checks and do the picking. And then you're going to choose some of the best performing companies in our portfolio. That's what we pitched to VCs, and the pitch worked. So as of today, we have 16 global VCs as LPs. That's our role. We're that nexus from local entrepreneurs to global capital. And that's why our portfolio strategy also reflects that, meaning we do small checks, but as many as we can. So we're really creating a buffet of companies. And then we're like, okay, now we're at 70, 75 portfolio companies. And we show to the LPs and like, okay, now choose what you like. This is our selection. Now you select over our selection. But I think that's the way it should be done. And we see it because some of these big LPs who are like famous funds, they receive a pitch deck from one of the YC companies in Africa. And then they send it to us like, guys, what do you think? I'm like, don't touch, run away. And we're here for that. We're here to just tell them some of this stuff is fluff and there's something serious here.
Yes.
And then our job is to do all the reference checks. I mean, you know that, but like half of my investing job is just calling people on WhatsApp. Hey, do you know that guy? Is he serious? And it's like calling previous employees, previous employers, previous partners, previous clients, just to make sure that it's clean. There's nothing weird there.
To your point, I think it's important to be able to understand the market, but I think also to have a network. It does matter, I think, particularly in the space.
So I'm curious about your interaction with Breega when you joined, especially the mindset, meaning you interact very closely with Ben. And Ben has been a VC for pretty much all his life. Apart from the fact that there's a lot of calculations about portfolio construction and ownership, but what do you think makes his brain wired differently, having practiced the craft of VC for so many years?
All of us are founders, and so we all have a bit of that mindset. But I think even across the partners, there's different risk appetites, different expertise, different exposure. I mean, me being a B2B exposure guy where someone who's built a fintech and B2C, very different. And so
what?
I'm like,
are you telling me marketing budget?
The revenue is not recurring, and there's churn. What is
you call it ARR?
You call it ARR? That looks very much like a once-off payment. And so from that perspective, I think it's also different experiences. And even just small things about I've served on company boards, I've served on listed boards, I've had my own company boards, but there's certain nuances which I think, and
wait, you served on listed boards?
Yes.
Man, every time I learn something new, I'm mind blown. Melvyn, what? How many lives? Can you disclose?
Yeah, no, but that's public information. So JC listed companies.
What's it called?
AdCorp is the biggest one I serve on.
AdCorp?
So AdCorp is Africa's largest workforce solutions company.
Okay.
So we help about 50,000 odd people get employment or have employment.
Okay.
So we do stuff from skilling through to actually placing them in roles, to outsourcing full roles. Top line, probably about, I'd say 12 billion rand, which is probably 800 million, I suspect, 800, 900 million. The rand is doing so poorly against the dollar. Ultimately, for me, it's the impact, right? Because being able to employ and place 50,000 people, it's a different scale. And I really...
Do you count them in your personal...
No, I don't. I mean, otherwise I get my numbers up, you see.
Yeah, but that's it. You did
Maybe
it.
I should.
You did it. Come on. It counts. I love it, man. So you're from Ugandan parents and you lived in South Africa. I'm very curious about Uganda and your take on Uganda.
Yeah.
Because population is 40 mil? I think it's quite decent, right? Especially with the East African bloc, but still there isn't enough movement. What would it take for Uganda to take off as a startup market?
So I think that there are some good startups in Uganda, and we're proud to be invested in one as well.
Numida?
Yeah, Nvidia. So doing really exciting stuff. I mean, they work with, I think, 16,000 small businesses on the fintech side of things, and most of them are women owned. And so really great work that Mina, Ben, and Kat and the team do there. But I think, I've met some really strong entrepreneurs building in Uganda, but they struggle to attract the right capital because they're from Uganda. And the bias is because they're from Uganda, it's like not one of the big four. And so my big intention with our fund is to say, we need to be investing outside of just the big four or the big economies being whatever, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa.
I understand the good intention of going off the beaten path.
Yeah.
But still, if you ask an LP, they're like, yeah, but the economics don't make sense. And also, when you're investing in a smaller market, usually they want to expand to the larger one. So is it easier to invest in a Nigerian company doing something in Nigeria or invest in a Ghanaian company that want to expand to Nigeria? Because when you think about it, it's better to bet on the local one who has a stronger grip on the market.
So I think you have to earn the right to expand. And I would argue that it's good to almost get product market fit, pay the school fees, build your product in your home market where you have lower costs, you understand you can get it done. I think for me, and I reflect on this a lot when it comes to even our journey at Go1, where I think, look, we're good entrepreneurs as co-founders, but I would argue there's some guys who are selling tomatoes down my road in Uganda who are better entrepreneurs than I am. But because the problem they're solving is so localized, they'll never attract the capital that builds the scale. Doesn't mean they're bad entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so for me, often the limitation of how big a business is a function of how big a problem you're solving and the ambition of the team to get there. Think about the Startup Nation, the book on Israel and its ecosystem there. It's a relatively small country, but then entrepreneurs build for the world. And so if you have entrepreneurs in Uganda who are able to build or solve problems that are globally relevant or Pan-African relevant, you then find them to be able to scale outside of their markets.
And maybe just to close off, I'm curious about, is there a business model where you just disagree with the general industry, where people really like it and you're like, you know what? I don't think it works. You're very skeptical. I see where VCs agree, but I'm also curious about where VCs disagree.
So certain industries have certain margins and they are what they are. Certain businesses are low margin businesses. And I think sometimes investors invest assuming that the margins aren't low margins. So you look at the GMV and you'd be like, okay, fine, the GMV looks big, it's growing like this. But the underlying revenue and the quality of the revenue is not that strong.
Okay. So you're talking B2B supply chains, you're talking trucking marketplaces.
And that's the thing. I think you have to do something different in that space. And if your margins are low, then ensure your cost structure is low. Because don't get me wrong, if you're making GP, you can still make a margin at the bottom.
Yeah.
And there's still big logistics businesses, there's still big distributor businesses in the world, and they're all like billion-dollar ones around the world. I think it's weird, VCs, we for many years incentivized growth at all costs. We were like, you aren't growing at this 20% month on month, we're not looking at you. As opposed to being like, how's your margin improving month on month? How is your retention improving month on month? I disagree with not necessarily the business model, but I think of how we evaluated businesses. Because all of a sudden, all revenue was recurring revenue. And we as VCs never called it out. We should have been like, no guys, it's not recurring revenue, and it's okay. Because not all businesses should be recurring revenue businesses. You don't create value every month. It's okay. It's a once of value. And I think it's important we have someone incumbent on each of us to take a view and say, how do you support those businesses in building more responsibly? Think about your exit horizon. Ultimately, you can just exit to a strategic or to another VC or exit in secondaries. But most businesses will ultimately become big enough that they end up maturing. Then it's private equity. And so the worst thing you can do as a VC is pay VC valuations and exit on a PE valuation not soon after because there's not much value created. And so I think it's where I disagree with how we often approach those kind of companies.
I can totally relate. I think the opposite case from people who invested in those models or even the founders, they say, yeah, but you don't understand economies of scale. Like once you aggregate enough volumes, then you can have negotiating power with the supplier. Sure, maybe. Let's look at Udaan in India.
Exactly. I'll go look at the biggest player in the market and I say, what are their margins? And okay, so what needs to be true for you to get to that scale?
Question mark. Final question. What's a business and a business model that you really like? And just can you get to the nitty gritty of why is there something very special there? And why do you think in 5 years, if you speak a bit again, like it's going to be one of those names?
I think more globally, I think there's something in climate which really excites me. And so I don't think in Africa we have put in the work to innovate, but also build brands in the clean tech space. And so I'm very excited about the proposition of how do you become the de facto brand or owner of the narrative and trust of that transition towards green, particularly at the home level. And there's also something to be said about, and how do you give back into the grid? And I'm quite excited by what that means at scale. you can have solars in your roofs and you have an inverter, but the inverter only has so much capacity. So why can't I come and install a second inverter and say what that generates, I'll put back into the grid and I'll be able to supply back into like, almost like micro mini grid, but at scale, like a mesh grid. And so I think that's something that's very exciting, which I think can replicate across the continent. I just feel there isn't one player that is owning that space. And look, there's not space for everybody to play.
Yeah.
I think it's the factor of if you can get that right, you can start innovating. And that excites me.
Amen to that. And if you find one, then let's do it together. We've got this climate fund that we're cooking up. It's super exciting. Just speaking to climate founders, we find a lot of seniority and a lot of high calibers in climate. And when we see the calibers and the wealth of experience that they come from, and there's always like engineering breakthrough, scientific breakthrough, IP.
Yes.
It is refreshing. Every time I speak to a climate founder, I'm open like 20 tabs and just like Google stuff. What is he talking about? What is this? Did anyone build this?
I think it's one of those things where it's one of those like societal and generation defining challenges. If you can get it right and actually really big impact in that space, I think game changer. So excited by that space.
Cool, man. Cheers to doing more in climate.
No, yeah.
I appreciate you, man.
No, thank you very much for today, man. Good chatting.
Peace.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.